It happened on a night I can never forget. A night that still echoes in my chest whenever I sit alone at my kitchen table. My son and his wife had invited friends over for dinner, and I had spent the entire day helping in small ways setting the table, keeping my grandson entertained, making sure everything felt warm and welcoming. I even baked a pie, the kind my son had always loved since he was a boy. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would remind him of home and the bond we once shared. But when dessert time came, my daughter-in-law brushed past it with a laugh, sliding her store-bought cheesecake onto the table instead. She called my pie old-fashioned, something no one wanted anymore. The words were light on her tongue, but heavy on my heart. The guests chuckled politely, but no one touched the dish I had made with such care. My son sat silent, his eyes fixed on his plate, offering me no defense, no comfort, not even acknowledgement. It wasn't just about the pie. It was about feeling invisible in a house where I should have been family, not a ghost. I remember sitting there, hands folded tightly in my lap, pretending the remark had rolled off me. On the outside, I smiled faintly, nodded along to the conversation, and kept my voice steady. Inside, though, I was collapsing. Every sacrifice I had made, every moment of love I had poured into raising my son, it all felt erased in that single instant. I kept thinking, how did we get here? How did I become the unwanted presence in my own child's home? I felt dismissed, small, and useless, like a piece of old furniture that no longer had value, but was too inconvenient to throw away. That was the sting, sharper than any insult I had ever known. I didn't cry that night, not in front of them. I carried my pain home, tucked inside me like a secret, but as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, one thought repeated itself over and over, steady and unshakable. That night, I knew something inside me had changed. After my husband passed away, the house grew unbearably quiet. For years, I had filled my days with caring for him, keeping track of his medications, cooking his favorite meals, and sitting beside him through long evenings when pain made sleep impossible. When he was gone, I had to learn to live with silence. It was a silence that carried both peace and loneliness. Raising my son had been my proudest accomplishment. I worked long hours, stretching every dollar, making sure he never felt the weight of the sacrifices I carried on my shoulders. I skipped new clothes, passed on vacations, and gave up the little luxuries other women allowed themselves. It never bothered me, because I believed that if my son had the chance to thrive, my life had been well spent. I thought he understood that, and maybe, once upon a time, he did. When my grandson came along, I felt life stir in me again. That little boy's laughter could melt the hardest of days. I adored him, and in those moments, I believed family was my true wealth. I wanted to be the kind of grandmother who showed up with cookies and hugs, the kind who told stories that made bedtime special. In his eyes, I could still see a reflection of the boy his father once was, the boy who used to cling to me when thunder shook the windows. But time changes people. My son grew more distant, distracted by work and by the demands of his wife. She, sharp and ambitious, always seemed to have her eyes fixed on something bigger, something more expensive, something just out of reach. Where I saw joy in simplicity, she saw limitations. Where I valued contentment, she seemed to value status. I remember one afternoon, she asked if she could be added to my credit card just for emergencies. she said, since it would make family expenses easier to manage. At the time, it sounded reasonable, even thoughtful. I wanted to believe we were building trust. But even as I nodded and agreed, a small unease stirred in me. Like a faint warning, I pushed aside. At first, I barely noticed. The charges on my account were small school supplies, a grocery run, things that seemed ordinary enough. I told myself it was fine, that families share and help one another. After all, she had called it just for emergencies, and maybe that was her way of easing the household load. But over time, those little transactions began to shift. What once looked like a bag of groceries started to resemble a dinner at an upscale restaurant. A modest clothing purchase soon became a receipt for designer shoes. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a gift. Maybe it was for my grandson. Maybe she just had a bad day and needed something nice. I kept searching for reasons, because the alternative that I was being used was too painful to accept. Month after month, the pattern grew clearer. Spa treatments, salon visits, deliveries from high-end boutiques. The word emergency stretched until it no longer had meaning. I would stare at the bank statement, my eyes tracing the numbers, my chest tightening. It was like watching someone slowly chip away at a wall you had spent your whole life building. I wanted to believe my son noticed, that he cared enough to say something. But he stayed silent, or maybe he chose not to see it. And so, I kept swallowing my questions, convincing myself it wasn't worth a fight. I told myself that family mattered more than money, that my peace was worth more than confrontation. But deep down, the unease kept growing. There were nights I lay awake, adding up the charges in my head, feeling frustration twist inside me. I would imagine what my husband might have said if he were still here. How he would have spotted the signs and told me not to ignore them. His voice wasn't there anymore, only the quiet hum of my own doubt. By then, I knew this was no accident, no misunderstanding. This was a pattern, and patterns don't change on their own. I could feel something inside me tightening, preparing. I didn't know when, but I sensed the breaking point was coming. I remember the evening too vividly, the weight of it pressing on me even now. They had invited neighbors and colleagues for dinner, and I wanted to help in the ways I still could, setting out dishes, making sure the drinks stayed filled, keeping my grandson entertained so the adults could enjoy themselves. I wasn't the hostess, but I hoped to still be part of the gathering. At one point, I offered a small suggestion, just something simple about how to keep the food warm a little longer. My daughter-in-law turned toward me with a sharp smile, the kind that hides more bite than kindness. In front of everyone, she dismissed me with a comment that cut deeper than she knew. She implied I was out of touch, that my ideas were outdated. And then she called me useless, said it so lightly that the room laughed along, not realizing how those words burned into me. I looked instinctively to my son, waiting for him to defend me, to speak up, to at least glance in my direction with some acknowledgement that I mattered. But his silence was louder than the laughter. He kept his eyes on his plate, refusing to meet mine. That silence broke something in me in a way no insult ever could. I sat there quietly, a faint smile on my face so no one would see the storm inside me. I kept my posture straight, my hands folded neatly, because dignity was all I had left in that moment. But behind that mask, I was unraveling. I thought of the years I had given him, the nights I went without sleep, the sacrifices no one had ever seen. And now, here I was treated as if I were nothing more than a burden, an embarrassment he would rather ignore. That night, I understood a hard truth. Respect, once lost, rarely returns. In that room full of people, I was more invisible than I had ever been in my life. And though I held myself together until the guests were gone, I carried the echo of those words home with me. Quietly, painfully, I accepted it somewhere along the way. I had lost my place in my own family. After that dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The humiliation clung to me, but beneath it was another unease, one that whispered in the quiet hours of the night. I started looking more closely at my mail, at the bank statements I had once skimmed without much thought. What I saw sent a chill through me. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize, amounts too large to be accidents. At first, I thought maybe I had simply forgotten. That age was playing tricks on my memory. But the more I looked, the clearer it became these weren't mistakes. They were patterns, regular transfers, purchases from luxury stores I had never stepped foot in, charges from restaurants I had never visited. My hands trembled as I traced each line, adding the amounts in my head. The totals made my stomach twist. It wasn't just the occasional splurge, it was thousands, pulled slowly, quietly, as if hoping I would never notice. I wanted to believe it was some sort of bank error, but deep down, I already knew. I thought of the day my daughter-in-law had asked to be added to my card, the way she had framed it as something practical, harmless. And I thought of my son, his silence at the dinner table, his refusal to look me in the eye when she cut me down. Could it be possible he not only knew, but allowed this? The betrayal sank in slowly, like ice spreading through my veins. This wasn't carelessness. It was theft, deliberate and calculated. My own family, the people I had sacrificed everything for, were stealing from me as if I were nothing more than an account to be drained. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, papers spread before me, my chest aching with every new discovery. There was heartbreak, yes, but it hardened into something else, resolve. I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, about the respect that had been stripped from me piece by piece. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I would stay quiet, too afraid or too trusting to challenge them. But they had underestimated me. That night, as I gathered the evidence, one thought echoed in my mind. This was no longer about survival in their house. This was about reclaiming my place, my worth, and my voice. The day I finally confronted them, my hands were steady, even though my heart felt like it was pounding out of my chest. I had gathered the statements, the receipts, every piece of evidence that showed what they had done. I laid them out on the table in front of me, like puzzle pieces that no one could deny. When I spoke, my voice was calm, almost too calm. I told them I knew about the withdrawals, the luxury purchases, the charges that had drained my account. I expected shock, maybe guilt. Instead, I was met with excuses. My daughter-in-law rolled her eyes, dismissing it as if it were trivial. She claimed it was all for the family, that I was being dramatic, that I didn't understand how expensive life had become. The sharpness in her tone was meant to make me feel small, but it didn't land this time. I was done being belittled. What cut deeper was my son. He didn't deny it. He tried to soften it, to make it sound like they were protecting me, managing things so I wouldn't have to worry, as if stripping me of control over my own money was some kind of kindness. That was the moment the truth struck me hardest. He wasn't just standing by silently anymore. He was part of it, complicit. For a second, the weight of that betrayal almost broke me. But then, something stronger rose inside me. I straightened my shoulders, looked them both in the eyes, and told them the truth. This wasn't about money. This was about respect, trust, and the family bond they had shattered. I told them plainly if the theft continued, if another cent disappeared without my consent, I would go to the authorities. I would take legal action, no matter the cost. Their faces shifted then. Shock, anger, disbelief. My daughter-in-law's hostility sharpened, but my son's mask cracked, fear flickering in his eyes. For once, I didn't falter. I refused to be silenced, refused to shrink. I made it clear that the days of quiet acceptance were over. They had taken advantage of me for the last time. As I gathered the papers back into my folder, my voice remained steady. Inside, I felt the fire of something I thought I had lost long ago, my strength. My resolve was unshakable. I walked away knowing that, from that moment on, the balance of power in our family had changed forever. After the confrontation, I knew words alone would not protect me. Promises could be broken, tears could be feigned, but action that was undeniable. The very next morning, I called an attorney I trusted, someone who had guided me through the paperwork after my husband's passing. I explained everything, my voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as I laid out the trail of theft, the manipulation, the humiliation. She listened carefully, then assured me I had every right to take back control. Together, we closed accounts, froze credit lines, and removed their names from every piece of paper connected to my finances. My daughter-in-law no longer had access to my card. My son no longer had a say in how my savings were managed. The legal protections clicked into place like locks on a door that should have been closed long ago. It was bittersweet. I never imagined I would need to protect myself from my own child. That thought still stung, a quiet ache under the armor I was building. But the more I secured my life, the more peace I felt. I was no longer living in fear of the next statement, no longer dreading what I might find in the fine print. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The hardest step was cutting ties. I told my son and his wife plainly, until there was accountability and true change. They would not have access to me, my home, or my resources. It felt harsh, but it was the only way to draw a line they could not cross. Their reactions were predictable: anger, accusations, a desperate attempt to flip the blame. But I stood firm. What gave me strength in those heavy days was my grandson. He was too young to understand the storm that had passed through our family, yet he carried with him the quiet light of innocence. One afternoon, he climbed into my lap with a picture he had drawn, stick figures of me, him, and even his father. Above our heads, he had scribbled a lopsided sun. He told me he wanted us all to be happy again. I held him close, fighting back tears. In that moment, I realized that even though I could not fix everything, I could still be a source of love and stability for him. His little arms reminded me why boundaries mattered. They weren't only for me, they were for the future, for the hope that maybe he could grow up in a family that valued respect and truth more than pride and greed. In the quiet evenings that followed, I found myself reflecting often. The bitterness was still there, but it no longer consumed me. Instead, it was balanced by something steadier resolve. I had taken back my life. Step by step, my son would have to live with the consequences of his choices, but I no longer carried the burden of enabling him. I began to see my own strength more clearly, not as something lost to age or circumstance, but as something rediscovered. Every signature I placed on a legal document, every account I secured, was an act of reclaiming not just my finances, but my dignity. That night, when I tucked my grandson's drawing into my bedside table, I whispered to myself a quiet truth. I had survived betrayal, but I had not lost myself. In fact, I had found a version of me I thought was gone forever. Calm, firm, and unbreakable. When I look back on everything that happened, the deepest wound wasn't losing money. It was realizing how easily trust can be broken by the very people we love most. Family is supposed to be a place of safety, but sometimes it becomes the place where the sharpest cuts are made. That realization nearly broke me, but it also gave me something I never expected at my age, a new kind of strength. I learned that love without boundaries is not love at all, it is surrender. For years, I thought sacrifice meant giving everything and asking for nothing in return. But sacrifice without respect only breeds entitlement. By saying enough, I wasn't pushing my family away. I was teaching them that respect is the foundation on which love must stand. It hurt to confront my son, to draw hard lines I never thought I'd need. Yet in doing so, I rediscovered my voice. I found a steadiness I didn't know I still carried. I realized that age doesn't make us weak, it can make us sharper, clearer, more resilient. Because we've lived through storms before, and we know we can survive them again. And in the middle of all that pain, I found hope in the smallest place, my grandson's smile. His little hands tugging mine as if to remind me that innocence and love still exist. His simple drawing of us together told me something I desperately needed to believe. The cycle can be broken. The future can look different. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: do not confuse silence with peace. Protect what you've built. Guard your dignity. And do not be afraid to demand respect, even from those you love most. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are within our own homes, but those battles shape the legacy we leave behind. I want you to think about your own story. Have you ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken up? Have you ever given so much of yourself that you started to disappear? If my words reach you tonight, let them be the push you need to reclaim your voice. And if this story touched you, I would love for you to share your thoughts. Leave me a comment about your own experiences or what you've learned about family, trust, and resilience. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine. Together, we can remind each other that no matter what we face, we are never truly alone.